I have been here for 10 minutes scrolling through props on Get FPV, and I still don't know what I want. I know I like the FX PB&J, and I know that I want a little more thrust. How do I even figure it out? I guess I'm just gonna have to write Bardwell and ask what he uses. Gmail, here I come. Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and what I said in the intro is totally true. There's like 1,000 options, maybe not literally 1,000, but there are hundreds of options for props when it comes to 5-inch freestyle. Mine right now are the FX Radberries. I like these props, but why do I like them? Well, they have the combination of things I'm looking for in this particular drone build. I know the all-up weight, I know the motor KV, and I know how I'd like it to fly. But how do we get from what we want to what we need? Today, it's really difficult. You've got to go through a ton of listings that basically give you minimal amounts of information and just try a bunch of things. That's really the only way to do it. You just go try everything possible. You buy one pack of everything and you go try it till you either like it or don't. That sounds like a nightmare. The alternative is you can go ask your buddies, if you have buddies. Or you can post on Facebook groups where you will be shamed for asking about props. Probably not by everybody, but at least one comment on there is going to shame you. There's really no good options right now. I'll tell you what I do. I go watch other people's thrust stand tests because I can't afford a thrust stand. I don't think many of us can. And if you don't know what a thrust stand is essentially a stand that mounts to a desk that has load sensors. The load sensors are attached in very specific places that give us different information about what the prop is doing on the motor. We get information like thrust output, torque, resonance, wobble, those kind of things out of thrust stand tests. But thrust stands are like really expensive, and I would have to have a place to mount it to, like near permanently, and all kinds of things I don't want to set up or pay for. I just want the information. And sometimes the vendor gives us some charts with their props, but it doesn't really apply to our motor specifically. We'd have to have a thrust stand and test the prop on our motor if we really wanted to know. And that's a friggin' headache. So I made this chart. And if you thought this super colorful chart was very confusing, you would be correct. It is very confusing because it is laid out all wrong, all on top of itself. And what I'm gonna do in this video is actually break that chart down. And what is this chart anyway? Well, this chart is a bunch of layers that represent different things we might be looking for in a prop, like response, durability, efficiency, smoothness, grip, and thrust. All things that we take into consideration when we want to pair it on a build, because we know about how much it weighs and how we want it to fly, and the different things that we kind of like in a freestyle quad. And we know what those things are called, but we're not really sure necessarily how to get a prop that does them. So the chart helps you have a little rule of thumb to determine the specs of a prop that fall in the range of the kind of things you're looking for. And what are those things that we can put into the chart to use it? Well, those things are weight, pitch, length or diameter, and also a couple things that are hard to measure, like stiffness and the tapered end of the blade, how long that is. We normally get the first three things from the listings on websites. The other two are a little more subjective, but we'll go over that here in a minute. So really, this chart is a rule of thumb for the various zones which different props of different specs will fall, so that you can kind of get an estimation of what it might do for you if you try it out, rather than just have to try it and hope for the best after you bought it, or determine that you want to buy 10 packs of them instead of just one to try it, because that's what I did on a couple, and I still have 9 of those 10 packs in a couple of instances. I quickly learned that lesson. But how did I get the data to generate this chart? That's a good question. What this is my pilot experience from the last year. I've tried about 50 different kinds of props. Now that's different manufacturers, different pitches, different sizes, different aerofoil profiles. There's all kinds of things that I tried. It totals about 50 different props, as well as a lot of things that I've seen other people do with their thrust stands, because somehow they can afford them and I'll never own one, but I'll take their data into consideration. So I've assimilated all of that into this colorful chart system. And yeah, without further ado, let's jump into this colorful chart system and let me tell you what it can do for you and how you can use it. So this is how the chart looks when it's in use. Now again, it has all of the colors layered on top of themselves, but that is not how we're actually going to use it. What I want you to look at here are the two lines on top of the chart. One is dashed and one is solid. And if we take a look at the chart again, you can see that the dashed line equates to prop A and the solid line equates to prop B. And all these different colors equate to the characteristics we're looking in the prop, and all of the measurements of the prop are outside the pentagonal edges. And what I've done here essentially is taken the information from two props and I have plotted it just by drawing lines and connecting them to where they are represented on the line for the measurement. For instance, on the pitch line, you can see that this one is a little bit above a 4.3 or 4.4, and the size is around 5.1, and the weight is a little bit above 4 grams. The stiffness and the taper, again, we're gonna cover that in a minute. Those are subjective terms, so I'll let you know how I assessed that and put this into the chart. But this is the way the chart looks when you're using it. It's designed so you can lay dots out on the 5 lines and then connect them with a line and see what colors all of that falls into. And the first 3 data points we're going to use to generate the line that we put on this chart are weight, pitch, and length. They are pretty straightforward. They can normally just be obtained from the product listing. They are the only values that are actually required to accomplish the use of this chart. We're going to look at 2 more, stiffness and the taper, but yeah, these are actually fixed things that can be measured, and they normally are in every product listing. And for this example, we'll be looking at these 2 props. The black one is the Gymfan 51433, and the pink one is the Ethics Bradbury, which I do fly. I pulled the specs on this from Race Day Quads. So this is exactly what they had. I just copy and pasted what Race Day Quads had in their specifications on these 2 props. And if we go ahead and plot these points on our chart, it looks like this. So you can see that we've plotted the length, which is the same for these 2 props. We've plotted the pitch, which is very different for these 2 props. And we have plotted the weight, which is also very different from these 2 props. And what we do here is we actually start with the length and work counterclockwise. You just put dots on the line where the data point is, and then you just connect the lines. It essentially makes this counterclockwise spiral that we're going to be using to see where it falls on top of all of the colors toward the end. But outside of these 3 measurements, there are 2 more that we need to take a look at. And these 2 values are subjective, which means they are sometimes hard to find unless you physically have the prop and you can put it in your hands to do these things. And the first of them is the stiffness. So stiffness is a measurement of how hard it is to deflect the prop. A measurement of hard would require significant pressure. Kind of think like you're taking one of those old school thick clear rulers and bending it, and that kind of pressure. That is a hard stiff prop. If it's really easy to bend, then it is on the soft side. And that is what that measure is. And essentially what you have to do is just kind of get a subjective feel for it and put it where you feel it is on the chart. If it's really hard to flex, if it feels like it doesn't flex before it wants to give, if you can't move it very far, it's hard. If you can move it really far, really easy, and it just springs back, then it is soft. That's how that measurement works. And the next is taper, which is just a measurement of the percentage of the vane length in which the taper from thickest to thinnest occurs. And all that really is a measure of how far down the length of the blade the taper starts. So if it had a long taper, that would mean that the taper starts sooner into the blade, closer to the hub. The shortest measure on this, so the longest taper possible, is something that would start at like 25% of the total distance from the hub. So if 75% of the blade is tapering, then you would have a long taper. A lot of racing blades that have heavy pitches, we'll get into why all this is in a little bit, taper really close to the end of the blade. So they may have a taper that starts at 80% or 90% even and just rounds off on the end. That is a short taper. So that's how you use that measure. And this is what the chart looks like when you get all the data points on it. Again, it's just kind of a spiral that starts at length and works its way around. And if you can't get those two subjective data points like the stiffness or the taper because you don't physically have the prop, or you can't get your hands on one of them, or you don't want to buy a set before you figure out if it might work for you, that's fine. You're still gonna get a pretty good picture of what the prop is capable of on one side of the chart. There's just gonna be some things that fall on the subjective side of the chart that you're not gonna be able to see, but we'll get there here in a little bit down the road. As far as measuring these things, if you do have the props, these are the Ethics Raspberries, and they are one of the options that we're looking at in this example. And you can see that I can flex this prop. It flexes and kind of starts its flex about halfway down the prop. It doesn't flex all the way down to the hub. That would be a super, super soft prop. This is what I'd call somewhere near a medium softness prop, maybe a little under medium. Now, some props that are wider are gonna be much stiffer and much harder to bend, and you might only get like this much bend out of the end of them. That would be a hard prop. If you can only get a little bit of bend in there with that same amount of force that I'm using to do this. And then as far as the taper goes, if we look at the blade profile here, we can see the taper starts a little less than halfway down the prop. It basically maintains its width through the majority of the vane length. Some props, like I said, for racing, don't start their taper till they're down here, and very few props start a taper 25% all the way down here at the bottom, which would be a long taper measurement. If it starts down here, it's a short taper. If it starts down here, it's a long taper. If it starts somewhere in the midsection, just kind of plot on the chart based on percentage. Halfway is 50% essentially on the chart. That's all there is to getting those subjective measurements if you do have the props. So this is what it looks like with all of the data from the actual GymFan 51433 and Ethics Raspberries that I have on hand. Looks like based on the spec sheet and my subjective analysis of the prop. And yeah, it has all the layers on here again, and you can't really see what's what, but just hang on because we are going to break that down here in a second. And then I'm going to show you how to put your own information on top of those layers and where you can get those layers yourself if you want to figure out what prop you might like based on the specs online. But if this has been helpful so far, be sure to give the video a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed and you like content like this, feel free to subscribe. All right, let's continue and look at all of the breakdown sections of the chart and see what kind of information you can get out of the thing. And the first property we're going to talk about is response. Now you can see in this slide that I have essentially removed all of the other color layers from this. I just have the response plot on this chart. And what that response plot is the blue blob there in the middle that coincides with different values on the lines. Essentially, if it falls in the blob for the value lines, then it has a good chance of being a good responding prop. And that's kind of how these layers work. Once you get it all plotted out, if it falls in the blobs you're trying to look at, then it probably is a good prop for what you're looking for. And what do I mean by fall in the blobs? I mean the dots on the lines fall in the color blob, not the lines themselves. The lines are really just for reference, but the dots that you put on the lines, the values that I'll show you how to do here in a little bit, if they fall in the color, then it probably coincides with a good property for the thing you're looking at. And why is prop response important anyway? Well, it determines how rapidly we're able to spin up and slow down the prop. It mostly boils down to how much torque is required to change its inertia. Essentially, that means if the prop is heavy or it's steep, it's going to be hard to spin up and slow down and change the speed of the prop because it's going to require more torque, draw more amps, work your motor harder under load, those kind of things. And what does prop response actually impact? It impacts things like prop wash handling, and it makes for cleaner, sharp movements. So if the prop is able to spin down and speed up faster, it's able to react to the stall condition in prop wash better, and you're gonna be out of the prop wash condition quicker. Now, there are a lot of variables in this. Like I said, this is all rule of thumb. Take it with a grain of salt, but it should get you in a zone if you can find a prop that falls into this plot with its properties. So the next plot we're gonna look at is thrust. And this will help us determine if a prop may or may not make good thrust, if that is a property we are looking for in a prop. But why is thrust important? Well, it's not just important for speed. It's also important for weight. If you have a heavy quad, you need more thrust to keep it in the air and maintain authority. Alternatively, if you have a really light quad and you put a whole lot of thrust on it, it's gonna go very fast, hence racing. Now, what does it actually impact? It impacts things like the hover point on heavy quads, how fast a racer can go through a course if they want to full throttle it, and it really directly impacts the strength of PID corrections. So as your PID controller is slowing down and speeding up the motors to correct for whatever the PID loop is telling it, the amount of thrust you're able to put out per rotation is going to mean that your PID values are actually lower because it's got a harder response from thrust based on how hard it's telling the motor to work. So it has to tell the motor to work just a little bit if it has more thrust, or a little bit more if it makes less thrust. That's why thrust is important when we're looking at props, especially on heavy quads. This is a big deal for heavy quads and racers. Now you'll notice something about this plot. There's a hole in the middle of it. It's kind of weird. It looks like an oddly shaped donut. Well, that's because the color that's shaded in is in the space where it makes sense for those props to make good thrust. The middle section there, the props are just too low pitch, which means they are also low weight and probably low stiffness to make good thrust. So I kind of excluded the center section of that chart. If it falls in the color area, just like all of the other ones we're going to talk about, if the plot falls in the color area, then it may be a good thrust maker. And there are a few things that impact thrust production negatively, like low pitch props or thin, tapered, and short props, because the lower the pitch, the less air we're moving and diverting every time the blade moves through the air. That's pretty straightforward. But how about tapered props? Well, the more taper there is on the end of the prop, as we spin it faster, it's going to what they call ring out, which means the end of the prop is actually going to flatten with the speed, the centrifugal force of the prop, and pushing against the air is going to flatten the prop, and it's going to become ineffective. So tapered props or thinner props don't do well for thrust production. There you go. And the next plot is efficiency. So efficiency of a prop refers to how much thrust per amp you are able to achieve. This leads to things like longer flight times and cooler motors. And efficiency really comes into play if you're like a long range pilot, or you just want really good flight times and you're cruising, or maybe you're doing something cinematic and lightweight enough to not need a heavy prop to keep your quad in the air. Efficiency really makes a difference if you care about longer battery life. For me, on these and on these motors with this weight of quad, it's not super efficient. It just isn't. I get 2.5 to 3 minutes, which is, I guess, average. But it all plays out based on your quad. Now, if I was long range and I had some really lanky, long, tapered blades that didn't produce a ton of thrust, but got me in the air and just over the hover point enough to fly, that would be super efficient if they were low pitch props, which is why a couple of things negatively impact efficiency, such as steep pitch props. They're usually stiff and heavy to maintain the airfoil shape of the prop. As the steepness of the pitch increases, we have to add more meat to the prop because as we push the air, it's going to want to deflect. So it's just a natural coexistence of weight and stiffness when you talk about high pitch props. But as we lower a pitch's prop and weight, it's going to have less drag under load. It's going to require less amp draw during motor speed changes, and it's just going to produce less thrust overall. But if you're looking for a highly efficient prop, you're not going to be in the zone of thrust, which is why the blob for this is kind of outside the range of the blob we saw for thrust. They don't quite overlap with each other, but they do overlap in some places. So that is the whole point of the plot graph. Let's look at the next one. And it is grip, which is basically how well it cuts through the air and holds a line. It'll cause the quad to not feel like it's drifting in turns, and it'll have less over or understeer to maintain a line that you're on. And if you haven't heard of grip before, it's kind of the reason why we went to 3 and 4 blade props. A lot of people, I'm going to say many years ago, it's many years in FPV years, it's like 20 FPV years, but a lot of people were flying bi-blade props, which is kind of odd, right? Well, bi-blade props have less surface area, which means they have less disc area, which means they grip the air less. Essentially, the more contact you have with the blade in the air, the more the blade pushes on the air and has actual meat touching air, the better the quad is going to be able to hang into a turn. So when you slide into a turn, the more disc area you have touching air, the less you're going to drift through the air and the more air you're going to just push with your props. That's kind of how grip works. And this plot will let you find out if maybe a prop has good grip. If you're one of those people who doesn't like to drift in turns, or maybe you're a racer that wants to take hard, sharp lines and you want it to hang there and you don't want to wind up banked out of it any more than you have to be, grip might be an important factor for you to look at. This next plot relates to durability, because nobody likes to break props in a crash and not be able to fly back home. The props will last longer and they tend to bend rather than breaking whole blades off of the prop. But there are a couple of negative things that impact durability, like stiff props. Stiff props tend to bend permanently rather than flex, or they break off altogether because they're just harder. Hardness is not necessarily a good quality. Now, as you go up in pitch, you normally go up in stiffness, and that's just kind of a natural relationship. As the prop gets stiffer, it's probably going to be less durable in the long run. And the other thing that negatively impacts durability could be tapered props. The longer a prop becomes, the more tapered it is, the less material is available toward the tip, and this causes things like losing entire tips of props, which I have had some props lose entire tips. I'm not talking about breaking off, I'm talking about really just ripping off. It almost looks as if it's torn, and that's because it gets so thin toward the tip area that there's just not enough meat to hold it on in a crash, so it can negatively impact the durability. You could probably still fly at home, but it's gonna be kind of weird. It's better than a broken prop blade, but the chart does take that into compensation. And the last plot we're going to look at is smoothness, which relates to a prop's ability to provide less vibration feedback to the frame and thus keep that vibration out of the gyro. It's what we're looking for if we're doing cinematic or cruising flight, and it really makes the quad easier to tune and more forgiving for tuning overall. What this really is, smoothness is a pretty straightforward thing we all talk about in FPV drones. It's how smooth the quad flies. I mean, really, if you actually look at some of my flight footage, these props are fairly smooth. They fall pretty decently in the smoothness plot because they are fairly soft and yeah, they don't have a whole lot of meat to them. So they actually flex whenever I'm flying. If I hit a pocket of air or something, or I take a sharp turn, you can see the prop flex. It's really strange. You see it in the edges of the GoPro. And that's what gives a prop some smoothness. Now there's a limit to that. If it flexes too much, then we start feeding back that flex into the motor shaft and into the arm and thus into the gyro. But you want just a little bit. It acts as a shock absorber. And that is really what this plot takes into account here. And that's it. We've covered all the properties you can look for using these charts and how to get all the information to fill it out. And hopefully it's less confusing now than it was when they were all stacked on top of each other, and I hope you can get some use out of it. But how do you use the things? I never went over that, right? You're screaming that at your TV right now if you're watching it on a TV, or hopefully don't throw your phone, man. Insurance doesn't cover it out of anger. Don't do that. Well, I've actually got all of these charts in a Google Docs folder, and the link is in my description below. Feel free to download them and then take them through Paint, because that's actually the easiest way to do it. If you just go into Paint and you look up a prop and pull it up on your screen, and then you start a line in Paint on, like, say, the length line, you put your dot on where the specs for the prop say the length is, and then you just move counterclockwise to the next line at the value that you're getting out of your specifications online. So you would take the length, which says 5.1, you'd put your dot marker there on the length, you would move that up to the pitch line at whatever the pitch happens to be, then you would make a new line starting on that pitch point and go to the weight. And eventually you have a plot with whatever you're looking for about a prop, and you can layer them on top of each other in something other than Paint if you want to get all fancy. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see this as a web application, maybe with some sliders and maybe with a form that people can fill out about the subjective evidence they have on their props so that you don't have to kind of question it if you don't know. I'd like to get other pilots' opinions on how stiff they think they are and how much taper there is in a prop, and then put that into some kind of resource that I can use to help fill in the graphs here if you can tell me what kind of prop you're flying or want to fly. I think that'd be interesting, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to see this as some kind of web app and if you'd use the thing if I did it, because I might just do that if it's something you want. I'm down for some coding. It's my super secret shame. And that's all there is to this. You have seen all of my charts, and my charts have seen you, and they sure do hope to see the inside of your computer's hard drive and help you get a little rule of thumb pick for your next prop choice. If there's something about your quad that you're trying to figure out, like maybe it drifts too much, You might want to plot out some stuff for grip and see what works out. Or maybe my drone's a little bit heavy and I'm not catching myself in split S's or power loops as much as I'd like to. You can do some stuff with the thrust plot and see what you can work out. Or maybe my props are just super under durable and I'm breaking a million of them and not at the hub, because if they break at the hub, there's just nothing you can do about that. Just keep in mind when you are using these that it's really designed for 3-bladed props. The stuff for grip and everything else is really designed around 3 blades, not 4 blades or 2 blades. It must be a 3-blade prop, and it must be within the zone of the measurements on the chart. At some point, I'd also like to do one of these for 7-inch. We may see that happen, but let me know down below if you use them and it works out for you, or if you've plotted props that you like and you kind of see what's expected. There may be some minor alterations to these charts over time. I'll keep the Google Drive link updated. Just keep checking and there will be new versions. I'll put a version number on there or something so you can know the difference. But until next time, stay greasy, enjoy my charts, and I will catch you later. And you thought I was gone, but I'm back, and that is because I have to shame my patrons. You see, I made a deal with these people that if they paid me monthly on Patreon, I would put their names on top of bacon in some kind of weird scene and then say them in the background as recognition. But really, it's less about recognition and more about shaming them for having made a terrible decision to give someone like me some of their money every month. It's just incomprehensible to me that someone could do that, but they do, and here is their recompense.
FPV, Free Range Chicken RC, Crash and Burn FPV, Dylan H, TS13 FPV, Chad FPV, Logan R, Sweet Will.
But seriously, thank you so much. If you were one of the names that I just read and photoshopped with lots of effort on top of bacon in the middle of the night probably to get this video done, thank you so much. I could not operate this channel without you. It is just impossible to continue to get things and do things without your support. So thank you so much for that. And if you're not a patron, consider being one if you'd like your name to go on the ever elongating list of people I have to Photoshop on top of bacon every week and am now beginning to regret having ever decided to do. Because why not make it a little harder on me for just as little as $5 a month? Or $1 if you just want to be there and hang out in my Discord with a special color. And if you have any questions about these charts, hit up my Discord. It's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm actually done now. So until next time, keep staying greasy, and I'll catch you later.